Latest in strategic affairs, subscribe to our YouTube channel. Click the bell icon for updates.
I'm Amitabh, Revi, and you're watching our weekly flagship show, The Gist. Our guest today is Ambassador Deepa Gopalan Wadhwa. She's India's former envoy to Japan. And usually I say I'm the host, but since you are hosting us here live in your beautiful home, thank you so much for inviting us in.
Thank you so much, Amitabh. Such a pleasure to be here on StratNews once again.
Pleasure's all ours, ma'am. Just looking at developments in terms of now, it's officially been announced that the Quad, the dates have been announced, and it's also been announced that the current Japanese Prime Minister Suga will be there for the first in-person meeting on the 24th. How important is the Quad in Japanese foreign policy?
Well, one must remember that the idea of the Quad was really an idea of Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe. So I think to that extent, they take ownership of the Quad. And not only did they make sure that, after a false start in 2007, that they resuscitated 2017. But as you see what has been happening now, they have been fairly persistent in being able to take up the level from officials to foreign ministers. And now we have a real life summit that is happening. And also to sell the idea of the Quad to other countries. So you are now having concepts like Quad Plus, and maybe there will be others who will join on based on issues. So yes, Quad is very much a Japanese idea which they sold, and they're, I think, greatly attached to it and give a lot of importance to it as a very important pillar of their foreign policy.
As you said, former Prime Minister Shinzo Abe, it's a confluence of two C's speech that he gave, I think, was it 2007 or even earlier than that?
That is right. 2007. That is right. That is right. That is right.
The question was whether there would be continuity. Now, Suga, we don't know what next or who next, and then what policy is next. Will that continuity, irrespective of who replaces him, continue in Japanese?
I think two pillars that of Japanese foreign policy that we will see to continuing, irrespective of not only who wins the LDP leadership. And then become the prime minister, wins the prime ministerial elections in November. Even if it is not the LDP, but the DPJ, I think we are going to see continuity in terms of the importance that Japan gives to both the Quad and the Indo-Pacific vision. I think these have become very, very important pillars of Japanese policy, just as important as their relationship with the United States. So I see continuity. You do have different three candidates who have been declared now. And if you see all of them, I think they are talking in terms of continuity. There are certain things that they talk in common. Certainly is, I think, the projection of Japan, its security interests, and on the economic side, of course, the effects of COVID. So to that extent, the three candidates that we do have right now, I believe, and if they do win the elections too, we're just presuming that whoever wins the LDP leadership will also become the prime minister. I do believe that we will see a continuity insofar as Quad and the Indo-Pacific is concerned.
Even when Prime Minister Suga was taking over from Shinzo Abe, the same questions were raised.
That's right.
Because that domestic concerns maybe would take precedence. But it seemed to be that he has gone on the same path as Shinzo Abe. The procedure itself, without getting to too much minutiae, I think 17th of September is when they can start campaigning. 29th is when the votes are counted.
That's
the
right.
LDP is, because of its position in the Diet, is assured of the Prime Minister.
Well, no.
And then the elections.
Then the elections. They're going to be elections. So what is not surprising is that certainly elections were due to the Diet, to the lower house. And they were supposed to be held between October the 21st and the end of November, which is what is going to happen. What has been a bit of the surprise has been the fact that Prime Minister Suga, who has just been Prime Minister for the last 1 year, decided not to run for the next LDP elections. for the leadership. And so I think that has been the surprise element. But the elections as such will be held on the 29th. And then perhaps in early October, there will be an extraordinary session of the Diet at which they will choose a leader of the LDP who will, because of their majority, be the new prime minister. But then he will have to face the hustings again in November. But I mean, very much the feeling is that the LDP should sail through, maybe with not the same majority that they had in the present Diet, but that they should win comfortably, because the opposition does seem to be in a bit of disarray.
I'm just going to take a question from one of our regular viewers, Matara, who asks, I'd like to know whether there are any changes in Japan's pacifist constitution. Is it an election issue for any of the political parties?
No, I don't think anyone has raised this, because, of course, the issue of Article 9 of the Constitution has been there. If you look at the three candidates that we are talking about, you're talking about Taro Kono, the former defense minister and foreign minister. We are talking about Fumio Kishida, who has been the former foreign minister. And you're talking about the lady candidate, Sanae Takaichi. And I think of the three, perhaps the person who would have the strongest position on the amendment to the Constitution would be Takaichi, because, you know, she's known to be ultra-conservative, ultra-nationalist, and she also seems to have been endorsed by Prime Minister Abe. So it's all really would be, I suppose, a matter of emphasis, and certainly in that context, it would be Takaichi. But so far, I haven't seen this being mentioned at all. There have been what has been perhaps an election issue in the context of the LDP has been really whether you restart the nuclear plants or not, because perhaps, as you know, that Taro Kono himself at some point of time was not in favor of it. But I think everybody is moving to a center, more a centrist position. And you also find Fumio Kishida, who was known to be a relative dove, now moving to say that, take a more hard line on defense and security issues and the threat by China. So there is a bit of maneuvering to see, I think, basically gauging what is popular with the people.
Matara, thanks you for that answer. I'm just take a few more from Omkar Datpe, who says, in the time of a US retreat, now it's looking at what's happening in Afghanistan, or when the US is relatively dormant, Japan becomes too important for the future of the Quad. Sai Prasad Vishwanathan saying, Suga leaving now, where does the Quad stand now? You answered some of these questions in terms of Omkar Datpe again saying, what are the views of Taro Kono on their engagement with China and the US?
So several questions there. Well, yes. So insofar as the Quad is concerned, one has to see that when Biden came in, one was wondering whether there would be continuity of policy, because he certainly wanted to distance himself a lot from the Trump era. But what you actually find is that he has given a lot of importance to the Indo-Pacific, to his alliance partners, to multilateralism. And so you find that one of the first multilateral activities that was undertaken was in February, when they had a foreign ministers meeting of the Quad members. So the commitment of the US to the Quad, I think, I don't think we need to question at all. And then you had the virtual summit, and now you actually are going to have a real actual summit, which is going to happen shortly. And you see, despite what is happening in Japanese politics and this upheaval that is on there now, we hear that Prime Minister Suga is committed to go. So I think this is very symbolic that irrespective of leaders of the countries, I think the commitment to the Quad is there. So I think that takes care of the US. Whether it is in retreat or not. And I'm sure while we talk about, the issues that are facing the world, they're going to be talking things like Afghanistan too. And, how can they sort of close ranks on the position, on their position of Afghanistan. So this summit is going to be extremely important. And was the third was on Taro Kono and his position on China. So, he actually is a very interesting political personality, because he tends to be far more outspoken than most Japanese politicians. And you read that he was perhaps one of the first Japanese politicians to actually call out China as being the biggest security threat to Japan. And he has continued with that. So he recently, in fact, in the end of August, it seemed almost as preparation for, for contesting the LDP elections, he brought out a book, which is kind of he's launched a book, which is his blueprint, if you may say so, as to where he sees Japan. And he talks about administrative reforms. He talks about, I think, a new way of working, but he does talk about the threat from China. So I think this is, going to be very important to Taro Kono, as to the other two candidates too.
And apart from the symbolism of, say, the Malabar naval exercises, where Australia has now joined for the second time again, how important a strand or a pillar in Japanese security policy is something like that when you're talking about China?
Well, extremely so. Because as you know, Malabar, it's in its 25th edition, 1 year. It started off as a bilateral India-US exercise. The Japanese joined a couple of times, it was one-offs, but they were extremely keen to be a regular member of the Malabar, which happened in 2015. And then they have been a member of Malabar. And now, of course, we have Australia there also. So de facto, we have all the Quad members there. So being a part of Malabar has been extremely important to Japan. And if you see the scale of the exercises, the complexity, and the commitment of each of the countries to be able to work together, to coordinate, to synergize, you see that they take these exercises extremely seriously.
Master, you alluded to it before as well, but since viewers are asking this again and again, Varun Pratap now, will it be easy for the US to withdraw from the Pacific region, similar to what they have done in Afghanistan, given their strong commitments to security? Well, one of the reasons why they have withdrawn from Afghanistan is to counter China.
That's right.
If you would like to elaborate a little bit more on how allied, there is a strand of thought among analysts that the US will be viewed among allies as not very credible, not very reliable.
Well, that's kind of obviously the conclusion that a lot of people would come to because of the way we have seen in a way, if I must say, the fall of Afghanistan, quite unanticipated the way it was. But you are quite right, because there are those who say that the US's, in a way, disengagement with West Asia in general is because they want to focus more on the Indo-Pacific and on China. So I do believe that, we are not going to see a superpower in complete retreat. I don't think that's what is going to happen. And the fact that they're going ahead with all the other initiatives, I think, they will be back in play. And I heard External Affairs Minister Jaishankar say somewhere recently that the US has the capacity to reinvent itself. So I think we should see it in yet another avatar. Yeah.
India now, both India, Japan bilaterals, and we are even having trilaterals with India, Japan, and France, I think, and maybe Australia as well.
That's right.
Another trilateral.
That's right.
So, Prakhar Rastogi, do you think the Quad can push an intensification of economic relations with respect to India, especially when Japan has had relatively mellow economic relations with India despite such activism? I presume he's talking about the business environment in India, or why is it not kicked off?
Well, first, when you look at the India-Japan economic relationship, I think what we seem to look at is, how much FDI is coming, how many companies have come, and then that's always compared with what the Japanese are doing in China, their presence in China, or their investments in the ASEAN and so on. But I can say that by itself, certainly over the last 10 years or so, in terms of FDI into India, there has been a massive increase in a number of companies. But I think what a lot of Indians miss is the fact that the Japanese come in with their ODA into areas which are extremely important to India. That is development of infrastructure. They're there where we really need it. And, if you really want to sort of assert yourself as an economic power, I think infrastructure is extremely important. So, Japan has partnered us in the areas of priority to us as far as economics is concerned. Yes, we would always like to see far more FDI, and I'm sure, and we hope that is going to happen. With this diversification of their supply chains and so on, I hope that is going to be, the idea is going to be born in reality. But Japan's, I mean, it certainly does have an engagement with India, an economic engagement. And I'll tell you what it is rooted in. It's very important for, I think, Indians to know. It's just the size of the Indian market. I mean, after China, we have the largest market here. So how can an economic power like Japan, an industrial power like Japan, not be interested in the economic development of India? It takes its own time, but I'm sure it will happen.
You talked about the diversification of supply chains, and there is, within the Quad itself, there is an initiative for supply chain resilience. It's the flip side of what we're talking about. Matara asking, given Xi Jinping's crackdown on business entrepreneurs in China, are Japanese businesses cautious about investing in China? I think there was a $2 billion fund that was also set up for the Japanese to move out.
That is right. China. That is to onshore, as it were. They had set this up at the beginning of the COVID pandemic because they found that there was a great dependence on supply chains which originated in China. So they wanted to get Japanese companies a certain amount to move back into Japan or to to the ASEAN, and later in that list they also added India and Bangladesh. Whether this has really happened, I think, is moot point. It's been a sort of not a complete success. I think few of the companies have. But then again, Japan has had a very, very long sort of investment in the development of China, if you look right from the beginning. And their companies have been there for the long haul. And I think this is one area where we are not going to expect Japanese companies to move out of overnight. And they will look where their interests lie. And I don't see anything really affecting the economic relationship. And one of the things that we should remember is that we do know that the security environment is fraught. They're bothered about this, the growing assertiveness of China. Their major threat perception comes from China, and so on. But on the other hand, the economic relations are not only good, but also Japan has been willing to work with the BRI. When Prime Minister Shinzo Abe visited in 2018, that was one of the the outcomes of that. So I think they work on a dual footing as far as political and economic ties are concerned.
I think you answered one of that question. The next question I'm taking up, which is Akash Kumar, do you see Japan taking a more aggressive posture against China in the coming future, and how much can India rely on Japan? Because ultimately, every country is fighting its own battle when it comes to China.
Oh, absolutely. I think, I don't believe in any of these zero-sum games. Or, I think each country decides on their degrees, their levels of engagement in different spheres based on national interest. So I think that's what we're going to see. I don't see that, Japan disengaging with China is going to make them look at us, or that their security threats from China is going to really change the way they look at China and their economic interests in China. But there is a certain, I think, general rejigging. We are hearing perhaps a harsher tone from Japan than we had ever heard in the context of the threat from China. I think that is what is to be noted.
What's interesting is both the noises and I think that there was talk between Japanese officials and Taiwanese officials.
Is right. That is right.
So just going to take that question also. Why is India so shy or resistant on opening or raising the Taiwan issue? Related to what?
Oh, well, yeah. Well, I think I don't even, what has happened with Japan of late is, and there's a lot of talk about a change in position, but how much of a change in position is? They have not abandoned their one-China policy. They're still talking about peace and stability, in the Taiwan Straits. What they are saying is that anything that endangers the security of Taiwan would also affect Japan because of the Okinawa archipelago, which is very close by. And you find that some of the senior ministers and officials have come out and made statements, but also these are not official statements. They have been with think tanks, they have been, it's not been kind of an official line. But obviously the Chinese are extremely sensitive. And what has happened, I think perhaps the most significant of this has been the sort of a dialogue which has been initiated between lawmakers of the two ruling parties of the two countries. So they have met and they have been talking security. So there's been some concern about it. As far as India is concerned, as you know, we do have a trade office over there. And we also believe in the one China policy. So I don't believe that, any one of us, whether Japan or India, is really radically changing that policy.
This question that Omkar Datte has been asking about a possible India-Russia-Japan trilateral. I know Ambassador to Moscow, Gopalan has talked about that. Can you explain those dynamics?
Well, yeah, there's been talk about this. So this is interesting that you mentioned this. What is happening is, I think there's a track 2 dialogue on, which Japan, India, Russia dialogue. Now, what did happen was, as you know, there is an issue between Japan and Russia on the 4 northern islands, the Kuril Islands, which are still there.
Still at war?
Technically still, I think is like there because, that is right, because of this this issue. But while Shinzo Abe was Prime Minister, he met Putin several times, several in the sense, I think 20 or 30 times. And, there was a very sincere effort, I think, that he wanted to somehow have some kind of agreement on it. And when he stepped down, he said that this was one of the issues which he had left, which he had not been able to fulfill, one of his ambitions. So that has been there. So it was a fairly, a warm relationship. I don't know to what degree it was between the two leaders, but that certainly was there. It got messed up a little bit because of what was happening in Ukraine and Crimea and all of that. And then, Japan, as part of the US alliance, had to toe the US line. So that did happen there. And then, the Russia-India relations and the India-Japan relations. So I think the three, there is a lot of space for us to talk, particularly about the Russian Far East. And our Prime Minister himself has been talking about the development of the Russian Far East, energy supplies, and so on. So I do believe that this is a good initiative. And I did see also, like you mentioned, that perhaps Ambassador Venkatesh Verma saying that there's a likelihood of a trilateral.
Again, when you're talking about spaces in Japan's space in Southeast Asia, among ASEAN, what we're seeing of late is, both the Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi and Japanese Minister in Vietnam. There's a defense deal that Japan has signed, and that's not the first. Before that, in Southeast Asia, they've done it with many.
That's right.
How do you see Japan leading that area? Because ASEAN, as we know, tries to so-called balance between all the superpowers, which means it doesn't go anywhere, especially criticizing, say, China or standing against China in any kind of partnership. Can Japan kind of, if not blaze a path, at least lead people down a path?
The ASEAN,
China.
Yeah,
they're all individually.
They are, but you see, the thing with ASEAN is that everybody is so sensitive to ASEAN. So you find at the last 2+2 dialogue between Australia and India, the centrality of ASEAN is, highlighted. And this it's been happening in the, in the context of the Indo-Pacific. And it's obviously an area, because if you talk of the Indo-Pacific, I mean, the ASEAN certainly plays a very important role. And therefore, you have a lot of leaders visiting the area. You had Kamala Harris there, barely about 2 or 3 weeks before. You have, and then you have Wang Yi there. You've had Nobuo Kishi, the Japanese defense minister there. In fact, very strangely or interestingly, Wang Yi and Nobuo Kishi were there at the same time. And of course, met the leadership there. And, Vietnam's position is quite clear. And I suppose that would be also ASEAN's position, that they will take what is in their own interests. As the Vietnamese, I think the Prime Minister mentioned to Kamala Harris that we will not align with either of them in the area. We will take care of our own interests. But on the other hand, they have signed this agreement with Japan on the export of defense equipment and technology. And there they have talked the language of the Indo-Pacific, free, open, rule-bound, that entire thing, rule-based order in the Indo-Pacific. So I think Vietnam is playing its cards quite like an intelligent country would. That's right.
You says Vietnam is running with the hares and hunting with the hounds, Matara. But it's interesting because BrahMos is on the table as well with Vietnam from India. But Master, really appreciate your experience and your expertise, and if I can find some of the comments that are reflective of that, just give me a second. Yeah, so Paranoid Android is the YouTube name of this person who says the ambassador really knows her stuff.
Oh, thank you.
And Sai Prasad says very eloquent.
Thank you. Thank you so much. It's an area that I really enjoy reading about. And I think it's a very important area for India because I keep saying this very often that this concept of the Indo-Pacific, for the first time, I think, when Abe spoke about it, he was including India in this, growth engine of the world. And so it's been very important to India. And yes, I have been, served both in China and in Japan. So it is an area of interest. And thank you so much. Thank you for all the
Pleasure.
comments.
Again, all ours, and you hosted us. So actually, I should be thanking you. Thanks
Most
again,
welcome.
Professor.
Most
Wadhwa.
welcome. Thank you so much, Amitabh. Great pleasure.
And do send us your feedback for this particular program and any other programs that you've watched on StratNews Global. You can also follow our social media handles on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram to get the latest news and analysis on our YouTube channel from an Indian perspective. This is The Gist. You've been watching Ambassador Deepa, Gopalan, Wadhwa with me on StratNews Global.